Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We will discuss the cycle of deter, detect, and mitigate as critical components of a successful insider risk program. In this webinar, we will begin the first of the three-part series focused on those components, and we'll dive deeper into common themes across those three components. My name is Josh Massey. I'm the Director of Enterprise Risk within the Global Security and Risk Management at MITRE, and I will serve as the moderator for today's event. I'm very fortunate to be joined by two special guests who will serve as panelists for our discussion and would like to now introduce themselves. Curtis, if you would please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Curtis Chappell. I am the Vice President of Security for Thales Defense and Security, Inc. That's the U.S. proxy company of Thales Global, Thales Group. And I also am on the board of directors for NCMS on the executive committee. And I got back involved with NCMS at the leadership level because I got so much out of NCMS over the years. But I'm an industry representative, and it's great to be here to represent my side of the perspective of insider threat programs and insider risk. And it's good to be in a panel with my old buddy, John Massey, and he represents the government side of things. So Josh, I'll kick it back to you for John to introduce himself.
Thanks, Curtis. John, over to you.
Hey, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Massey. I'm the director of the Department of the Air Force Counter Insider Threat Hub here located in San Antonio, Texas. Been on board here for just over 2 years and been a part of several of these webinars we've had over the last year, and looking forward to today's discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you both. And thank you again for your participation in today. I think we will all value the inputs that both of you have. To start off, I'd like to unpack a little bit more about today's discussion and the themes that we will discuss over the next three series. Again, deter, detect, and mitigate, as that is the theme for the National Insider Threat Awareness Month. And for our audience sake, as we've been preparing for these sessions, for those of us on the ATARC Insider Risk Working Group, we've identified some additional common themes that we just referred to as the 5 C's. And I think we'll continue to come back to these themes in each of the three-part discussion. So those 5 C's, I'll quickly just kind of unpack and provide that context for the discussions. The first is communication. Communication is the pathway to transparency and building trust within the company on programs, processes, and missions. Communication is a two-way street. A successful program must be the communicator, but also listen and be attentive to feedback. The second C is culture. Culture is set or defined by policy and leadership to ensure a safe, secure, respectful, inclusive, and productive environment. Culture determines what is acceptable or unacceptable behavior within the organization, as well as amongst sub-organizations. The third C is character. The character of the individuals within the company should support and align with the culture and the company mission. The fourth C is compliance. Compliance is the act of the alignment of character with culture. The expectation of compliance is set by communication. Compliance by the company and all individuals within that organization ensures fairness and equity. And finally, consequence. Non-compliance with culture should have consequences. So within that context, I'd like to get right into our discussion. So Curtis and John, we'll start with Curtis. But as you think about those 5 C's, how do they relate to the most effective deterrence mechanisms your organization is applying?
Curtis, you're on mute.
I hit the button, but it didn't go. It's not my fault. So looking at it in context, the 5 C's, we really just put them down in aggregate, but it's important to break them down to individual components for them to work well. Communication for me was one of the biggest elements that we had to work on. We wanted to be fully transparent with our employee base that this is the direction we were taking based on modern risk and modern capabilities. If we were going to have an effective insider threat program to mitigate insider risk, we had to have screening and monitoring and detection capabilities. And what we really quickly learned was that communication resulted in really we met the deterrence by having that expectation of detection. People knew what we were doing. We were fully transparent. We communicated it. So if you know the likelihood that something's going to be identified in a behavior, if we're watching, then people have that expectation of detection, then that in itself served as a significant deterring factor. And then compliance was another element of those. We'll talk more about that coming up. But I think communication and compliance were two of the elements that I keyed in on quickly that were important to having an effective program. John, what did you have to offer for that?
Yeah, great points, Curtis. I mean, from the communication standpoint, that's very important and key for us at the Air Force. When I came on board here a little over 2 years ago, I wanted to peel back the onion to figure out how do we communicate with our workforce and our various subsectors of stakeholders that we have. And what I mean by that, security managers, counter insider threat professionals, commanders, the general workforce, and everyone else in between. So we have created really a portfolio of resources, job aids, mitigation toolkits that we have pushed out there and we provided to various segments of our workforce because we, from an Air Force perspective and our Counter Insider Threat Hub, we do not take punitive action. We facilitate punitive action or we facilitate administrative action, meaning if there's an insider threat event, we are doing holistic risk assessments and we're informing a decision maker such as a commander and enabling that individual to make a decision to mitigate that risk. So educating your workforce, your key stakeholders from a communication aspect is very, very important. From a cultural aspect, you want to establish a culture that promotes deterrence and security and insider threat as shared responsibilities. See something, say something, do something, make sure that people are out there, they understand the program exists, they understand what they're supposed to be on the lookout for, what they're supposed to report, who they're supposed to report it to, and so on and so forth. From a character standpoint, you want to in place a trusted workforce of vetted individuals who will protect information and adhere to security procedures. Now, people are likely already vetted through DCSA and other organizations if they're undergoing a security clearance, but most companies, most organizations have a lot of people that are not cleared as well that can do a lot of damage to your institution. So you want to be able to think about them in the nature of factoring in these 5 C's into how you deter bad behavior. And then on compliance, we sometimes miss the part, but it's important to identify ways to measure compliance with deterrence. Are you getting the information you need to effectively deter bad behavior? And then are you acting on that information to prevent it from occurring again? The consequence is the key ingredient to that. We live in a day and age where a lot of times we don't hold people accountable all the time. So people are not often used to being held accountable or not able to comprehend what the consequences are to their actions. We have to communicate that and be able to let people know that if they do engage in bad behavior, they do bad things, they cause harm to your company, to your organization, that there will be consequences that result from that. Over.
Yeah, quick point, that consequence is tied to that culture too. You know, we represent two sides of industry, the industry side and then the government side. And it's more of a challenge for me in certain cases to in place certain elements of our insider threat program for civilians and uncleared versus, you know, all Air Force employees working for the government. So, you know, for you and your complex program, however you design it, you got to look at those different cultures and consequences and match those to what works for you and your environment and also the company or agency that you work for.
Absolutely.
Great. Great way to start off the conversation. John, let's just go a little bit deeper. You know, thinking about where we are at in 2024, you know, kind of post-COVID, have you had to adapt or consider additional deterrence mechanisms for a more hybrid or remote work environment, or maybe even just geographically separated staff around the world?
That's a great question, Josh. You know, that's something where a lot of organizations, after COVID occurred, they looked at the way we operate, the way we work, and tried to figure out, okay, how do we enhance and increase efficiency and production, and maybe not necessarily just flip the switch and go back to the old, in some cases, antiquated way of everyone's in the office all the time, you know, 5 days a week. And I can tell you, I've worked in other organizations and now with the Air Force as well. We do have a lot of geographically dispersed personnel, and we have individuals working in hybrid work environments. We have individuals in some cases, and this is not just unique for the Air Force, this is for a lot of government organizations and non-government organizations for that matter, that work in 100% remote positions. They were able to demonstrate, hey, I can do my job just as well, if not better, working from home, and it provides work-life balance and increased productivity and so on and so forth. So we have to take a look at that from a deterrence aspect and say, do we have the controls and the mechanisms in place to be able to deter bad behavior? So for example, if somebody's at home, how do we know if they've printed something from the office? Let's hope it's not classified, but even if it's CUI, for example, if they printed something from the office and they brought that home to work on it, are they securing that information? Are they leaving it out for a spouse, to be exposed to it, a child to be exposed to it, a visitor to the home to be exposed to it? What are those security procedures that are in place? And there's no way to really monitor that. In the office, you can do end-of-day security checks where you're walking around and checking offices to make sure things are secure. You can do bag checks to make sure people aren't leaving with classified information. You can't go to somebody's home and knock on the door and say, hey, your boss is here. I'd like to walk in and make sure you're protecting all of our information. So we have to think outside the box. We have to figure out, how we're deterring bad behavior. We're promoting good, just security hygiene with respect to how we do business, treating our home office just like our physical office that we would have on site, and making sure that we're educating. So going back to the communication piece, going back to the cultural piece, having that embedded and ingrained in everyone's DNA to understand that those requirements that you have to adhere to in the office, that extends to your home office as well. You need to be taking the same procedures there. Now, from a user activity monitoring perspective, for example, there are some things that we can put into place to help us there with respect to the use of information systems. So we have a little bit more latitude with respect to our monitoring capability, but we want to make sure that we're creating an environment where folks don't go home, they're working from home, they're likely 50-50 shot, they're in their pajamas, but we want to make sure that they're not complacent with respect to security hygiene. We want to make sure they're doing all the things in their office that they would be doing from a good security aspect when they're in their comfort of their own home.
Yeah, John, I really like the way you phrase that. And I think, in my mind, I'm coming back to the 5 C's and the relevance is those apply at home as they do in the office, but we need to be intentional about it, right? We need to be call out hybrid and the different considerations explicitly and address those to ensure that we're, again, cultivating that culture and defining what that compliance and expectations are. I really appreciate that. Curtis, anything to add on that one?
Just a quick point that, it's us working internationally too. I mean, from our side, we're working with a lot of people in other areas, and then we have a lot of people that are traveling for a FOCI company, for an international defense contractor. We're traveling ourselves. So, what we developed years ago pre-COVID was just the mentality of, doesn't matter where you are, you're working on a company asset. That company asset protects the information. Wherever you go, you need to operate the same, whether it's in your office, in your home office, whatever country you happen to be in. And that really helped us to not skip a beat during COVID, where all our folks already had that culture and already had that compliance mentality of keeping information safe and working in a controlled environment, protecting themselves, protecting their information for intentional and unintentional activities.
Great. And Curtis, I want to circle back to some of the comments you made in the opening discussion, and you highlighted the importance of screening and monitoring and being transparent in those expectations and the importance of them as deterrence mechanisms. How do you balance privacy issues with these activities, and how are they aligned with the 5 C's that we've been discussing so far?
Well, they align delicately, and then on the industry side, it was a 5-year discussion, if you want to put it that way, with HR and with legal about what we needed to do, why we needed to do it, and how we could do it without the employee base considering that we were invading their privacy, that we were complying with laws and regulations pertaining to privacy. Don't forget general data protection requirements, GDPR, that came about during that time, especially all the European cooperation that we do. So there was a lot of that we had to take a close look at. What it really boils down to is most of industry at a lower and mid-range level are not doing company-level screening and monitoring. They're relying on continuous evaluation, continuous monitoring activities that the DoD has put in place, which is important. But to truly create a culture of compliance, we need our employees to understand that they are the assets that we consider them, and we're looking out for them. We want to be proactive about that. So we were able to implement screening and monitoring on a company level under the authority of two parts. One part for our cleared employees, and that was more cut and dry because they have agreed to this preserve trust that we need to maintain. But for our uncleared employees, it was a little bit more of an ordeal to get through. Ultimately, it comes down to compliance with company policy. We are investigating and we're conducting internal inquiries into predictive intelligence that we gain access to from public records that indicate we might have an issue with company policy. So it is protecting their privacy, but also enforcing company policy that is the path to success for engaging in company level screening and monitoring. And of course, communicating that to the employee base is essential to help them understand, yes, you can send it to a background investigation at your point of employment, but that doesn't stop. And we continue to leverage the public records to understand if there's a legal issue that's going on, something that's a little bit more focused on violent felony criminal activity. And if something comes up, we will come talk to you about it. Number one, first and foremost, is to help those employees. We want them to understand that we're there to guide them to seek help. We want that to happen long before anyone crosses the line and somebody gets hurt or something worse. So we really we want people to understand that communication and why we're doing what we're doing for preserving character, preserving trust. And once they understood that, we had very, very little pushback on privacy concerns from our employee base. And it's been a very effective tool that's even expanded further in our company. So it is a long road on occasion. There are a lot of conversations that need to take place, but you can do it. And it's really necessary for us to demonstrate that we have effective programs, not just compliant programs, but effective programs for preserving safety and security within our companies.
Thanks, Curtis. We're going to keep the conversation going, but I just want to remind everyone that the chat is available. If you do have questions, hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end that we'll be able to circle to some of those questions. Next question over to John first. $1 million question. How do you effectively measure deterrence? Are there specific measures or metrics that you found successful? Can we apply this to the 5 C's we've been discussing? What are your thoughts on that area?
So I will say that in my 17-year government career, I've spent probably 16 years and 364 days working on metrics and figuring out which ones are meaningful and important and tell stories and drive decisions and get resources that I need. It's very difficult to measure a positive outcome or meaningful metrics that paint the story or paint the picture in saying that I deterred someone from doing X because I took action Y, they didn't do action X. Very, very difficult, very, very challenging. But you can evaluate, I think, if you are effective in deterring bad behavior by looking at, your reporting. For example, are you getting reporting from those reporting sources where you need to be getting reporting from? Are they taking mitigation action? So for example, in the Air Force, a lot of our reporting comes from our field, our eyes and ears that are out there, the boots on the ground, the commands. Reports come into us. We're looking at the totality of our data and information to create these holistic risk assessments to provide recommendations back to commanders to help them make informed decisions. Are they actually going through and taking those recommendations and seeing them through, actually committing to and engaging in the action to mitigate or to reduce the risk? Are we then getting reports later on where the event has already been mitigated when it's reported to us? That's what we're trying to get. Maybe it's been mitigated, maybe it's been thwarted, maybe the damage has been minimized, so to speak. I think that's very, very important when you think about uh, words having meaning and how you articulate the metrics of your program. You've got to be very careful and very cautious never to share with leadership, oh, I deterred 300 bad actors from stealing, classified and sensitive information related to the programs that we work on. How can you prove that? You may be able to say, hey, we had deterrence procedures in place where we identified a bad actor going down the critical pathway of becoming a really bad actor and doing really significant damage. And we intervened early and we off ramped them, or we mitigated, addressed the issue in some capacity. I think those are some things that you can look at, but again, it's very, very difficult to tangibly say, yes, I deterred someone, but you can evaluate the effectiveness of your communication, of the culture that you've established, of all those 5 C's that we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes. Evaluate and check against those. Do a quiz on the monitoring statement that people acknowledge when they log into their system. When's the last time somebody actually read what they are acknowledging and agreeing to? I'm going to be truthful. I don't remember the last time I read it verbatim. I have a really good idea of what it all says, but do a quiz and check with people to see if they understand. Hey, do I know what I'm consenting to? When I log into my information system, am I aware of what my company or my organization is monitoring? We're dealing with a trusted workforce, even if they're not in cleared positions. There's still a higher level of expectation that we hold these populations to with respect to what they have access to and the privileges that we are providing them. Over.
Curtis, your thoughts? Any more luck in finding that magical answer on the
Yeah, it's hard to quantify the negative statistics or the statistics you don't have because you prevented something from happening. I said, so to round that out and make the case, I think you're looking at what you can quantify. For us, a lot of the technical controls that have been put in place to prevent potential insider threat method of operation, you could show things were not allowed. Thumb drives were failed, how many times that happened, and that decreasing in volume over time. Phishing exercises and tests, and we're way past FBI-AOL.com. They're very sophisticated. They're very socially engineered. So we can demonstrate that we are quizzing our own people. We're testing them with phish tests, and they're clicking on links, or they are reporting, or they're just deleting, and we can look at that. And over time, we've been able to demonstrate an effectiveness of some of those tools. But in the long run, we can also identify people that we've helped get to the employee assistance program that's there free for them. And we can show that we're really trying to help them. I think that's one of the most significant analytics that we've been able to show our entire employee base is the people that we've been able to help. And that's sincere, that's true. That's why we have the program in the first place.
Yeah, this has been a topic, again, that every discussion I'm a part comes up. Nobody, claims that they've got the answer for it. But just as we've been discussing the last month leading up to this discussion, I'm reminded of the saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I do think, those 5 C's that we've kind of been, developing and talking about kind of maybe provide that bite by bite approach of, it's very difficult to quantify deterrence, but we can measure how effective we are communicating. Is that having a change on culture? What are we seeing as it relates to compliance rate and consequences? So I think those lots to be done still, and maybe someone in our audience, will come up with a solution at some point. But I think, it's a journey that we're all on together. We're coming up on 6 minutes. Again, if there are any questions, get those in. The last prepared question, this is the first of a 3-part series focusing on deter, detect, and mitigate. But we kind of outlined that these aren't 3 disparate parts, but really a cycle. So Curtis, starting with you, how does that idea of the interrelationship of those 3 components being a cycle kind of affect your approach and your processes?
Yeah. As you just said, Josh. I mean, it's one step at a time, a step-by-step approach. It's layering and a life cycle. So there's multiple mechanisms, multiple avenues we go down that in aggregate create an effective program, not just one disparate solution by itself. So when I say cycle, I mean life cycle. We go down this road, we take another look at what we have in place. Is it effective? Is it working? Is there something we can do that's more efficient or effective? And we put it back in the program. So we have all these different layers, and then we take a look at it and do the life cycle, tweak things, add it back into the program, lessons learned, case studies that were valuable to us that were good and bad. So it's not just a snapshot in time, it's layers, it's life cycle, taking a look, and a constant living program that's evolving over time.
Excellent. John, over to you.
Yeah, I want to answer this question and kind of piggyback on what Curtis was talking about a moment ago when he mentioned like the thumb drive example. So if you look at this from a deterrence aspect, and how do you review your processes and evaluate effectiveness, that's one example that comes to mind. If you see 20 instances of employees plugging in thumb drives when it's prohibited behavior and activity, what are you doing to address that? Or, obviously you're likely addressing it with 20 individual employees for 20 individual circumstances, but then are you getting messaging out to your workforce to say, hey, just a reminder, you're not allowed to do this. And then maybe the next quarter, that's reduced from 20 to 2. That's an example of how you measure deterrence. Hey, let's get a periodic refresher out there to the workforce to say, these are things you can and you cannot do. But I think that continuous evaluation of your program in each and every aspect is very, very important. It's very, very critical. How can you be more effective at deterring bad behavior? So looking for trends, looking at that analysis to figure out, okay, what are your hot spots, so to speak? Do you look beyond the individual and look more at organizational enterprise risk? Meaning, are you looking within programs, within sectors of your organization, within branches or divisions of your government or non-government institution? Are there cultural issues there? So, for example, do you have a leadership problem? A leadership problem where you don't have adequate leaders that are holding people accountable or communicating the right expectations to the workforce, therefore resulting in a flare-up of significant issues that are occurring and that are happening. I've said time and time again, people don't typically wake up one day and just decide out of the blue with no predispositions whatsoever or no stressors in their life that they're going to become an insider threat. A lot of what we try to do in this mission space, our job is to try to get people off that critical path, facilitate a positive outcome, early intervention to help them out and support them as necessary. So, our job is not necessarily to stop everything from occurring, because if that's our goal, we're going to fail every time. But how can we get better with deterring bad behavior and then being able to rapidly act upon it to help people out when we identify it occurring?
Thanks, John. So we do have 2 questions. Jessica asked about the 5 C's and be able to list those. I'm going to copy and paste those into the Q&A. Again, credit to the working group. It's just kind of a concept that as we've been discussing, this is kind of manifested. And then a question from Craig. One, an emphasis on emphasizing not just culture, but security culture, which I think is a great observation. And then a question that I'll throw over to you, Curtis and John, in 45 seconds or less. Sometimes the idea of compliance can be a little scary and off-putting. So how do we talk about compliance in a way that is, kind of engendering, that positive response and not the negative connotation?
I'd say it boils down to safety and security. And, as many times as I had these conversations with people who were concerned about their privacy, I reminded them that when we walk through an airport, we treat it differently these days than our parents did, or our grandparents did. We have to. And we need to be accepting of that culture with the understanding that it is leading towards a good end result, a positive, not a negative. And John said it early on. What we have to do is shift our culture to to move from a see something, say something, but then a do something mentality. It's not something, it's not our responsibility, it's not our business. Everybody has to play a part of this. And when I have any one-on-one conversations with anybody, nobody disagrees with that. So we're all here for the same purpose, and that helps us have those conversations. And that communication, that's key. That's the undertone.
John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just very quickly, think about the tagline, security is everyone's responsibility. So is insider threat, insider risk as well. I think if you have the right culture in place, that culture is fostering compliance with everything that we do without outright kind of drilling that word, into people's heads or hammering it home over and over again. Create the right culture, and in that culture, you will have a trusted workforce of individuals that want to do the right thing. They're going to want to report matters when they are concerning, and they are matters that want reporting. And they're going to hopefully make the jobs and lives easier of security and insider risk professionals in your organization, because you're going to have your eyes and ears out there, your force multipliers out there within your organizational community doing a lot of the work for you.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you both for taking the time today. It's been a great discussion. I think extremely informative. I want to thank all of our participants for joining us today. And just remind everyone that this is the first of a 3-part series. Please join us again in July as we discuss Detect. And a link will be coming out soon for that session. So thank you very much. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you.